Hello friends, in the series which we are doing on history of India from 1700 to 1950, today we will talk about Phule, Dr. Ambedkar and the caste question. In the earlier lecture on the same theme, we talked about the contribution of Jyotiba Phule, how he established the Satyashodhak Samaj, and through his writings as well as his ideas he tried to bring about a lot of change in the society, not only in the framework of the establishment of the various schools, the kind of opinions which he had with regard to the education of women and how women they should be treated equal to the men. They were quite fascinating, keeping in mind the situation in those times of the 19th century where how women they were being discriminated on various grounds, and how we find that how Phule wanted to create some kind of society in the principles of the individual liberty and equality, and his ideas they were in a way were dealing in the framework that there was no need of any kind of intermediary between the god and devotee, and how the bond between the god and devotee was to be direct in nature. And he also believed that any book, none of the book was God ordained in that sense. And when you talk about the kind of inspiration which was taken by the other scholars or other reformers in the later times, we find that Phule's work was in a way carried on by Dr. Ambedkar as well, and how Dr. Ambedkar, with the help of the scholarship which was given to him by Sayaji Rao Gaikwad, who was the Maharaja of Baroda, he was able to attend the Columbia University, USA, and with his hard work he managed to study at the London School of Economics as well, where he also did his doctorate as well as he became a barrister as well. And the way he dedicated himself once he returned to India to the task of upliftment of the untouchable community was quite commendable. And he also played an important role in the drafting of the constitution as well, as we all know, and various features or provisions of the Indian constitution which are talking about the ideas of equality, liberty, fraternity, they were in a way also handiwork of Dr. Ambedkar, who not only through his personal suffering but also through his own hard work we was able to prove his worth. And we find that when he talks about these kinds of aspects where he not only played an important role in the framework of the constitution, but even before that how his followers they were being mobilized by him. A number of organizations they were also established by him from time to time, and how these organizations, whether it was Bahishkrit Hitkarni Sabha, Independent Labour Party, and later All India Scheduled Caste Federation, all of them they played an important role in terms of creating awareness among the masses. And we find that the kind of work which was done by Dr. Ambedkar, where he led a number of temple entry satyagrahas, the way he organized the untouchables, number of educational institutions they were being opened by him, and he propagated his views from the newspapers like Bahishkrit Bharat and Janata, and he participated in the round table conference as well to protect the interests of the untouchables as well. So we find that through his activities, through his ideas, Ambedkar definitely played an important role in terms of influencing the masses, the way he was able to mobilize masses in different regions, and how people they in a way joined with him with regard to the movements which he launched, definitely played an important role in terms of bringing about awareness about the issues which were being propagated by Dr. Ambedkar. We also see that his relevance in the framework of the Constituent Assembly, where he was the chairman of the drafting committee, and the way he played an important role in the framework of or the framing of the Indian Constitution. And we find that he was also made the Law Minister of India up to 1951, and he in a way from the personal point of view we also find that he adopted Buddhism, and he also asked his followers to do the same. So, when we tend to understand Dr. Ambedkar, he was not only a political leader and social reformer, but also a scholar and thinker as well, because we see that how on various issues he was writing continuously, and from that point of view we find that the various social and political matters, they were being taken up by Dr. Ambedkar. And when you talk about some of his important writings, then we find that the annihilation of caste, who were Shudras, untouchables, Buddha and his dharma were some of the important writings. And when we talk about his thinking and how he was trying to apply his ideas in the framework of the institutions which were established by him, then he always talked in the framework of equality, equity and liberty. So, in that sense we realize that Dr. Ambedkar definitely played an important role in terms of motivating the people and to join his movement. And we also realize that the kind of influences which could be seen on him, as I told you initially, Jyotirao Phule was one of the personalities or persons who had influenced Ambedkar, and the liberalism and the philosophy of John Dewey was also influenced his thinking. And we find that Gautam Buddha, he exercised a deep influence on Dr. Ambedkar's ideas on society, religion and morality as well. So, we find that the kind of work which was done by Ambedkar through his ceaseless efforts for the removal of untouchability and material progress of the untouchables was commendable. And he firmly believed that the progress of the nation could not be realized without first removing untouchability. And he believed that the removal of untouchability was linked to the abolition of the caste system, and that it could only be by discarding the religious notions from the basis of the caste system. So, he was a believer in this kind of an idea that how if India has to become some kind of a progressive nation, if India has to be unified, then the issue of untouchability had to be tackled first, because when untouchability and the caste system, they will be there, then they will perpetrate some kind of a division in the society. So, if this society was to be united in some sense, where everyone was to be treated equally, then such kind of a system which was based on the caste and untouchability, it had to be removed. And in that sense we find that social reform was one of the most important priorities of Dr. Ambedkar, and he believed that the economic and political issues should be resolved only after achieving the goal of social justice. So, he was a firm believer in the idea of social justice and the idea that the economic progress would resolve all social problems was also ill-founded, as he believed. And he believed that no real change could take place without doing away with the evil of casteism which was there in the Indian society. And social reform in that sense was a precondition of revolutionary changes in society. So, he talks about the idea of social reform, he talks about the idea of social justice, and he believed that once the idea of social reform will be implemented, then the other kinds of disparities, whether economic, social, cultural, all of them, they will be removed in the society. And when you talk about these kinds of ideas, that how society was to be reformed, then we talk about the reform of the family system and the religious reform. And when you talk about the idea of family, we find that the abolition of practices like child marriage, etc., which were there in the family, they had to be removed, they were to be discarded, because it was also important from the framework of the uplifting of women in the society, how women, they were to be emancipated, because once the issue of the child marriages would be resolved, when widow remarriage would be allowed, then it would be in a way taken care of. And when you talk about the way reforms regarding marriage and divorce laws, then they would also benefit women who were as oppressed as untouchables. So, he talked about with regard to the women's rights, he talked about that how the marriage and the divorce laws, they should be in favor of women, and when women, they will be benefited, then their situation would definitely improve in the society, and that is how he also favored the inheritance laws which were there. And when the Hindu Code Bill was framed, then he was in the framework of the inheritance laws which should be there in the favor of women. And we also realize that the kind of work which was done by him, where he criticized the degradation of women, and he says that both men and women, they were equal, they had the same status, and women, they should be given the right to education, because he believed that when women, they will be educated, then they will be empowered as well, and they will be able to take their own decisions. And with that point of view, he was also a supporter of women's right to property. And he not only talked about women from all sections of society, but we particularly talked about the women of the untouchable community to come forward and participate in social and political movements, because they were at a double disadvantage from the point of view of being the untouchable community and also being women, because the kind of situation which existed at that point of time was such that women, they were not being given equal rights. So we find that how the kind of role which was played by Dr. Ambedkar with regard to the caste system, and his belief that how caste had made the society stagnant in nature, and this kind of a drawback, it poses the permanent problems for integration as well. And he also believed that it was also playing a role in that sense in the framework of the obstacle to the growth of national spirit as well. When people, they will be divided on caste lines, then they cannot be unified. So the idea of national spirit, it will also be in a way diluted or dissolved. And he also believed that how the caste system was perpetrating injustice on the lower caste. They were not being treated equally, and it does not allow the progress of the lower caste, and the lower caste receive nothing but contempt. So these were some of the ideas of Dr. Ambedkar with regard to caste and the kind of changes which could be brought about in this particular kind of a system. And when one is talking about this kind of a discrimination, then it was also creating some kind of a moral degradation and demoralization of the lower caste. And we find that he criticized the caste system on that ground as well. And we find that he says that untouchables are the constant object of injustice. So how this kind of a social justice which was to be provided to them, and the way they were being denied education, good livelihood and human dignity was also being talked about by him, that once they will be educated, once they will get jobs, they will be empowered, then that kind of a self-respect which was to be given to them, that will also come to them as well. And he talks about that how the caste system has dehumanized the people thoroughly, and the mere touch of one human being pollutes another, shows the gross level of inequality and brutality to which caste system had sunk. So he talks about that untouchability was to be removed, caste system was to also be removed, in that sense that this idea of purity and pollution which was there, that when one person will touch another person, then the high caste person would be polluted, was one gross idea with regard to perpetrating of inequality in the society. And he says that the battle for the removal of untouchability becomes the battle for the human rights and justice. So he not only talks with regard to the rights of the people, but at the same time he was talking in the framework of the justice and how justice was to be delivered to everyone. And Dr. Ambedkar believed in these kinds of aspects, and he always felt that unless people will take initiative and at their own level, where they will be educated, where they are ready to fight for their own rights, the situation is not going to improve. And he also believed that when one is talking about the issue of caste, then nothing worthwhile can be created based on the caste system, and one can build neither a nation nor morality on this basis. we find that he was talking within the framework of a classless society or a casteless society, where there are no distinctions on the basis of caste, and we find that the ideas relating to intercaste marriages, they can effectively destroy caste, but the difficulty is that people will not be able to marry outside their caste so long as casteism dominates their thinking. So some kind of an active measure with regard to intercaste marriage will only be able to effectively destroy the caste when this kind of an issue with regard to the caste did not dominate their thinking. So this kind of a mental setup was to be changed of the individuals, of the society, and when the mental setup will be changed, then only that kind of a change which was being seen was to be brought about in the society. And he believed that education definitely was an important factor in that, and how it would in a way definitely play an important role in the improvement of the untouchables. And he also in a way urged his followers to reach the excellence in the field of knowledge, because he felt that knowledge was a liberating force, and the education makes one enlightened, makes one aware of the one's self-respect, and also helps one to lead a better life materially. So education definitely was playing an important role, and how when one was being educated, then one was able to relate to other important aspects. The self-respect of that particular person would also improve in that sense. One would be aware of one's own self-respect, and from the economic point of view also, we find that they would be able to live a better life in that sense, because once they will be educated, then definitely they are going to get good economic avenues, and with the better economic avenues, their economic situation definitely is going to improve, and with that the standard of living is also going to improve as well. And he says that one of the causes of the degradation of the untouchables was that they were denied right to education, and he also in a way criticized the British policy on education for not adequately encouraging education among lower caste, and he mobilized lower caste and untouchables and funded various centers of learning. So Ambedkar was also critical of the colonial government, that how colonial government was not providing the suitable economic avenues for the untouchable section of the society or to the lower caste, and once they will be provided the suitable economic avenues, then they are going to prosper in them. And we find that he was also a labour member in the executive council of the Governor General, and he was instrumental in extending the scholarships for education abroad to the untouchable students, and he wanted that the untouchables to undergo both the liberal education and technical education, and he felt that they should acquire new skills and start new professions, and education would enable them to get employment as well. So Ambedkar in a way felt that how both liberal as well as technical education was to be imparted to the untouchables, and how when more scholarships they will be given to them to go abroad, then they will be educated there as well. And he felt that when new skills will be acquired by the untouchables, then they will venture into new kind of professions, and when they will get that kind of an employment. And we find that when you talk about the mainstay of Ambedkar's argument was that the oppressed classes must generate self-respect among themselves, and the best policy for the uplift was the policy of self-help, that how they have to help themselves to come out of their situation. And once they will work hard, and one has to also cast off their mental servitude as well, then they can attain an equal status with others. So self-respect definitely was one of the components with regard to what Dr. Ambedkar talks about, and he says that one has to leave aside one's mental servitude, then only one will be able to acquire that kind of a self-respect. And he was also a believer in that sense, that how when one is talking about social reform, so he did not believe on the basis of the humanitarian sympathy or philanthropy, etc. Rather, he talked about the equal status and the just treatment. It was a matter of right and not any kind of a pity which was being shown on them. And he says that how downtrodden they should assert and win their rights through conflict. They should be ready to come in confrontation with others, those who are in a way trying to oppress them. And we find that his writings and activity greatly contributed to the resurgence of the untouchable community, and he created political awareness for the downtrodden. And Dr. Ambedkar insisted upon the progress of untouchables as a condition for the development of the Indian society. And we also see that in order to create a spirit of self-assertion among untouchables, they had to be given their own identity. So, we find that how Dr. Ambedkar was able to mobilize the masses in that sense, that how their self-identity was an important component of their personality, and they had to believe in themselves, they had to learn new kinds of skills and tasks, they had to educate themselves, and for that maybe the government had to provide some kind of scholarships or monetary kind of an support to this section of society, so that they are able to come out of their situation. So, we find that this kind of an idea or the spirit of the self assertion among the untouchables, it was being talked about by Dr. Ambedkar, and he talked it in the framework of the question of identity, which was important. And we also see that he visualized the new society which was based on the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity, and he was aware that liberty alone would not be sufficient in that sense, because liberty and equality, they must exist simultaneously, and this alone will ensure that the quality of the moral and material life of all individuals will improve. And we find that when you talk about the kind of ideas which Dr. Ambedkar possessed, he was in a way talking about the kind of economic disparity which was there in the society, and any kind of social injustice which was there in society was to be negated by the individuals. And when you talk about the political democracy, and the political democracy without the social democracy and economic injustice, economic justice is meaningless. So, economic justice was to be provided along with the social democracy, then only political democracy would be meaningful for the individuals. We also see that Dr. Ambedkar was fighting for a society which was free from any kind of caste domination and class exploitation, and he believed that two machines of exploitation, caste and class, if they are in existence, and then they are going to, in a way, would be detrimental to the needs of the untouchables and the other lower caste groups. And he felt that they had to be removed from the society, and then only society would be relevant as well. And we also see that when one is talking about the ideas of equality and liberty, they will only be realized when there is a strong sense of unity among the members of the society. And the members of the society, they will be united when the concerns of discrimination, whether the discrimination is on the basis of the caste or class, they are not there. And we find that the people, they have to realize that they have common interests and common future as well. So, this kind of an idea was being promoted by him. And we also see that how people, they were belonging to the same section of society, they were belonging to the same fabric. This is the kind of idea which was to be promoted and propagated among the masses. So, then we find that it will create some kind of sense of brotherhood among them, and that was the idea of fraternity, which was an important component in the framework of equality and liberty in the ideas of Dr. Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar made it clear that ideal society of his conception would be a society which was based on liberty, equality and fraternity. So Ambedkar in a way realized the importance of education. He believed that unless people would be educated and unless some kind of a social reform as some kind of a precondition would not be applied to the society, then any kind of economic and social kind of a unity in the society would also not come, because once social reform will take place, then only the question of political reform has to come, or even any kind of economic reform would not be successful unless the social reform is there. So social reform was some kind of a precondition which Ambedkar talks about, and he also talks about the principles of equality, liberty and fraternity, that how they will also be very important in the framework of bringing about the kind of positive change in the society. And he also realized that unless people they are educated, unless people are ready to go into other kinds of professions or jobs which are beyond their caste, then only the kind of untouchability or the caste system which is there, it is going to be dismantled. So in that sense, Ambedkar was quite progressive in his thought and in his approach, and even in his writings we find that he tries to communicate all these kinds of ideas. And we find that his personal suffering was one of the important components, because he underwent the kind of discrimination which was there in the society, and with his own strength and with his scholarship and his constant attention to the problems of bringing about equality for the downtrodden section of the society or the untouchable community, he was able to bring about that kind of a change. And that was also one of the bases of his thinking and the writings. And when he was given the task of being the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution, we realize that his whole experience in India as well as abroad, it was there, and he realized that unless some kind of laws with regard to the liberty, equality and fraternity they are being framed in the constitutional framework, then only the society is going to change. So we find that this kind of a role which was being played by Dr. Ambedkar with regard to the caste system, with regard to the issue of untouchability, was very important within the framework of the Indian society, because we find that any kind of a discrimination which was there in the Indian society would go away only when these kinds of issues they were being taken up by the socio-political reformers in that sense, because the initiation was being made in the 19th century by the social reformers. And the political reformers like Dr. Ambedkar definitely played an important role in taking forward that kind of a narrative which was there in the 19th century with regard to the social reform. So with this, I'd like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.